Right. Good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world, so US or Asia or Europe. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Sarah Pospos, who completed her psychiatry residency and was a chief resident at UCLA. And she was ranked #1 in the annual psychiatry resident in training exam. But more importantly, for all of us here, she's an IMG from Indonesia, and she applied after 4 years of her graduation. She landed 21 interviews, including top from Yale, Duke, Emory, UCST. So today she's going to share her strategies for preparing for the exams and how to plan efficiently. What's the best strategy to take care of yourself when there is limited time? So how to overcome the stress, how to remove all the hurdles. So welcome, Sarah. How are you? Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Pawan. I'm doing fantastic. And thank you so much once again for having me and for taking the time on your Saturday, everyone, to join us today.
So just a housekeeping, guys. For those of you who have questions, we will take it up in the chat as well. So as we are going through some of the Q&A. So Dr. Pospos, do you want to have a brief introduction about yourself? Tell us a bit about, just your professional career, and then we'll dive into the Q&A.
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Pospos. I was born and raised in Indonesia, and I went to med school in Indonesia, as Pawan had mentioned earlier. Back then, when I applied to residency, I was 4 years out of med school. And despite that, fortunately, I was able to get 21 interviews, including from prestigious places, as mentioned. I was a chief psychiatry resident at UCLA Kern, and currently I'm a practicing psychiatrist. I'm devoted to helping high performers like yourself to optimize and balance their lives by incorporating exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress management, and other sustainable lifestyle changes, which is very much in line with my expertise in perinatal psychiatry as well as sports psychiatry.
Thank you. So as you know, most of our audience are preparing for USMLEs. They are in some part of the USMLE journey. So first question is the overall USMLE, maybe the exam strategy. How was yours different and what were the results? Given that now step 1 is going to be pass, it is already pass fail, and you have CK, maybe step 3 is also in focus now. So talk to us about your USMLE strategy.
Yes, absolutely. So as you can probably tell, my strategy, as you mentioned, is different. I like to work backwards and start from the end. So in my case, my end goal was to get accepted as a psychiatry resident. I believe a well-rounded application is very important. And with that, although scores is obviously very important, it's not the only part of the whole application, right? So I decided while studying and preparing for my USMLEs, for my exams, I also worked simultaneously at 3 places, UCLA, UC San Diego, and Riverside. And as a result, I was able to complete all my exams in 4 months. So I took step 1, back then, this is 2017. I took step 1 in February. I took CS in April, and then I took CK in June and received high scores for all of those, while also keep working on these 3 places. And as a result, I was also able at the same time to get the research experiences, publications, clinical experiences, great letter of recommendations, and network with good mentors, which translated to the 21 interview offers that we had talked about earlier.
So this is very, very important and interesting. So let me summarize. Within 4 months, you took the 3 USMLE exams, step 1, CS and CK, but you were also working remotely with the 3 universities you mentioned, along with your preparation, and you were getting those experiences. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I was working simultaneously with those 3 places, but also in addition, after that, I worked simultaneously with 2 others, which are Harbor UCLA and UC Santa Barbara.
So then this is, so let's dive into the nuts and bolts of it. What's the first step to take? What is the plan? How do you execute all this?
Yeah, great question. So my USMLE strategy, as well as life strategy in general, if you may, is two-part. First is to plan, and second is to execute. And we can do a deep dive on both as
So
well.
let's talk about how do we plan efficiently?
Absolutely. So for planning, my first step number one, is to open an Excel spreadsheet and list down all the tasks that you need to do to get to that goal. So let's talk about USMLE Step 1 as an example.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, your big task would be all the topics that are going to be asked in Step 1. So psych, medicine, and whatnot. And then step number 2 is to prioritize by using 20-80 principle. Because as you guys probably know, not every task is created equal. So if you choose strategically, you can just do 20% of the work and still get a result, 80% of the result. This is what we commonly known as quote unquote high yield. So in our USMLE Step 1 example, let's say I would focus on putting in the time for pathophysiology, which is very commonly asked throughout the exam, versus spending a lot of time just memorizing random genetic diseases that may or may not get asked once or twice in the exam. And then step number 3, in your Excel spreadsheet, I have 2 pages. First one is a big picture page where for all my big tasks, I assign a deadline to each and every one of them. And the second page would be my hourly calendar. So for that one, horizontally, I would list the dates, the available dates. So January 1st, January 2nd, what have you. And vertically, I would list the hour, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and so forth. And then I would break down my big tasks to smaller tasks. So that would look like, for example, for psychiatry, I would list UWorld questions in psychiatry. How many are they? First aid chapter, Thoma videos, and so forth, and then just plug it in, each one of them to the available slots.
Okay.
That would be the planning stage.
All right. And what about the execution stage? How do you execute efficiently?
Yes. So for execution, 2 tips. The first one, unfortunately, for all of us, I believe multitasking is a myth. What I mean by that is, right? And what I mean by that is, if you have a task that requires brain power, it's best to do it single-handedly and focus on it individually. Why? Let's take an example. If I were to do psych UWorld questions and then switch to derm videos and then go back to medicine questions and then switch again to surgery videos, for example, by going back and forth between these task types, so questions, videos, and topics, my brain just requires more brain power and energy, and therefore performance-wise, it's not as efficient. So I would advise all of us, including myself, to focus on this type of task that requires brain power. And my second tip would be to use Pomodoro techniques, which just means that you dedicated a specific time for work. Let's say the traditional way is 25 minutes of work, and then take a 5 minutes break, and then do it repeatedly. The time combination 25-5 doesn't have to be that way. You can, try it out, see what works best for you. For example, 45 minutes, 15 minutes break, 50-10, and what have you. You can also use any sort of timer, your phone, an app. I personally like to use a free app called Interval Timer, just because I can set a customized time and it's very efficient to use.
Is that, you said interval?
Yes, it's called Interval Timer. It's free and it's available in iPhone, iOS.
Okay. So now, obviously, many students are still stressed, right? So they have a lot of questions about self-care, given the crunch of time. So how do you incorporate self-care and such when there is limited time?
Great question. So Fortunately, to build on what I said earlier, as opposed to the task that requires brain power, when we're doing tasks that don't require brain power, we could definitely multitask or even cluster tasks. So those tasks that doesn't require brain power include some types of exercise. So for example, for me, when I'm working with my computer, right, whether it's doing questions, watching lecture videos, typing in notes and what have you, I got myself from Amazon. It's very cheap, a little stepper and also a little floor desk, which I put on top of my regular desk just to prop my computer up so I can work on it while standing. So this way I could get my steps in, just, 30 minutes a day is fine. Something is better than nothing with this lifestyle changes, while also not wasting quote unquote valuable time of not studying. Because I remember back then, time is money essentially, right? It's very precious. So I would stay up late or wake up early just to get questions done. I was like, 8 hours sleep, what is that? So time is very important. And this kind of tricks or hacks could go a long way in terms of self-care.
Ah, ah. All right. So if the students incorporate all of these strategies, there may still be other hurdles. So what are some of those hurdles and how should they overcome?
I'm so glad you bring it up, Pawan, because as you said, you could be doing every single things right by the books. You could be taking a great care of yourself, but common hurdles may still arise. And that may be in the form of burnout, test anxiety, imposter syndrome, feeling that you're not good enough for all of this. It happens to a lot of us and it's very, very common. However, if it starts to cause you distress in your life, or if it starts interfering with your day-to-day life, like affecting your grades, affecting your works, relationship, and whatnot, then it's best to seek help, psychiatric help. You can always reach out to your local psychiatrist, or if you're in California, you can contact me too. My next available appointment is in September by telehealth.
Okay. And how should they connect with you? Although we'll publish the your details if you would like, but what is the best way to connect with you?
Definitely. So if you want to connect and get more free resources like the ones we talk about today,
Yes.
my website is lifestyletelepsychiatry.com/subscribe. Or if you want to chat further, you can also find me on Instagram at lifestyle telepsychiatry.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, before we open up for questions, what other advice do you have? Anything that we missed?
Yes, absolutely. So I want you guys to take a minute here with me to imagine, right? Imagine what if it's possible for you to no longer feel lost, not knowing where to start, overwhelmed, and instead you have a clear vision of what you want, not what everyone else wants, but what you want. Let's imagine what if it's possible for you to not feel the constant fear, doubt, second guessing yourself at every step, and instead you clearly know how to get to your goal and what you need to do day in and day out to reach that goal. Imagine if you feel empowered, know where you stand exactly in your journey, 30%, 60%, 90%, what have you. And you can clearly see progress day in and day out instead of just waiting for those light, at the end of the tunnel that may or may never come one day. I just wanted to remind you that we are all doctors here, and that means that we already beat the odds. On average, there's only 7% of us that get admitted to med school, right? And for most of us, we move here from another country, which means that not only we deal with the challenges of this medical school training application and others, but also literally we're starting from scratch in other aspects in our life. And that's no small feat, guys. It's huge.
Yep.
So if I can do it, you can do it. If others can do it, you can do it. Just remember, you got this.
Good. And I know you have some other resources, maybe one pagers and all. So if we can post it on our YouTube channel, if you can send, or we'll email other resources after the webinar to our attendees. But let's now dive into the questions that I am getting. So the first question is, how did you manage studies and rounds during your clinical rotations? How was your schedule like during your year 3 and 4?
Oh, sorry, just to clarify, year 3 and 4 of med school or
I
application year?
don't know. He just mentioned year 3 and 4, but mostly managing your studies and rounds during your rotations, I think, is the first question.
Gotcha. Very good question. So in the spirit of being efficient, the first part or first answer to that question is I didn't do the traditional clinical rotations. I tried to combine it with my research experience. So for me, what that looked like is, for example, at UCSD and UCLA, my research experience is not a wet lab research. So it deals with psychiatric patients, participants, and I did administer a lot of psychiatric measures and get clinical interactions that way. The second part of that question is how to build. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So just to clarify, I got the clarification. The question is mostly about your med school schedule during your 3rd and 4th year of med school.
I see. So in terms of, I'll go ahead and answer that first. Just to clarify, for my med school, I did it completely back in Indonesia. I don't have any US clinical experience or exchange or anything like that during med school. My 3rd and 4th year, which is the clinical years in Indonesia, is fully based on the hospital or clinic. And the way I managed to study there is honestly just to use downtime. Because as you all probably can relate, sometimes patients no show, or we have to wait for the attending to rounds and things like that. So I always like to use that time just because I don't want to go home and then have to study again and lose my personal time or self-care time. I try to maximize that time at work. And one tips that might help for me is to have all my study materials in my phone or in something that's accessible. So I put my notes, for example, in my phone, so I don't need to open my computers or bring my heavy computers all the time with me at rounds and things like that.
Thank you. Next question. When is the best time to get into research, especially in the med school, let's say during the first couple of years when we don't have much experience or knowledge in research?
Such a great question. So the first part to that, when is the best time, would be the earliest, just because the process to find a research experience, it may or may not be long, right? So if you want to approach it strategically, I would say try to get research experience at big institution, university places, just because it's already very well founded. They're more likely to publish, meaning you would it's more likely for you to get results in terms of publications and whatnot. The infrastructure had already been set up. And the process to get that is a bit long because you might need to research who's in charge in terms of what kind of specific research they do, who's the, who's heading that research, and then reach out to them, do the back and forth communications before they agree to bring you in. The second part of that question is when you don't have quote unquote enough clinical experience or enough experience in that particular research field or areas. I think it's important to strategically position yourself, including using transferable skills. So you don't necessarily have to have 1 year of psych experience, psych rotation, and whatnot, but you could highlight, how you might be able to solve their research problems by, for instance, emphasizing that you're a hard worker by giving your accomplishment XYZ, or if you have any biostat training, Excel experience, things like that, you could emphasize those too.
Thank you. Next question. Did you set goal to pursue exams within the 4-month deadline? Let's say if you could get matched or if you could not get matched, what was your plan B? So two questions. Was 4 months a deadline, and what was your plan B if you couldn't match?
Another great question. So I love it. So the first part to that is if the 4 months is my quote unquote exact goal or not. It's not 4 months per se, because as I mentioned, I like to work backwards, right, from the end goal. And in this case, in the USMLE case, the end goal would be to finish all 3 USMLE, Step 1, CK, and CS at that time, in order to get certified before applying in September. So I try to work backwards, meaning I'll give the ECFMG certification process a month or two, right? So from September, it will be July. Yeah, July. And then from there, I know that I have to pass these 3 exams with high scores. It makes sense to me to do it, to do the Step 1 first, and then CS and CK. And based on that, I kind of set a flexible goal for all of them in terms of just completing all these 3 by July, and then try to take it one step at a time, backwards from that goal. And the second part of that question, I absolutely love this because for me, there's no plan B. It doesn't sound as strategic, I know, but desperation, guys, is a huge motivator. And because in my case, I really want to be a psychiatrist here. I don't want to go back to Indonesia, and I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else but psychiatry. So I have no choice essentially but to match. And in order to match, I need to get all these things that I already set up and planned, and that just keeps me going day in and day out.
Okay. There are a couple of questions which you may not know the answer because they are very kind of operational. So I'll take one of those.
Yeah.
So we are getting a lot of questions on ECFMG certification, and my school is not recognized by the accrediting agency. For all of you who have this question, you just need to start the form 186 before 2024, and you should be all good to go. No issues with ECFMG certification. So we have covered this in other videos as well. So just so that you all know. The next question, I'm currently training in UK, plan to go to US. Would my training be counted as an experience or as a gap? And the answer is both. You are 6 years post medical school graduation. So UK experience is very valuable in the US. However, the more you get away from your year of graduation, they consider it as a gap. Older year of graduation have a hard time in matching. So the best would be to try to get into the match cycle as soon as you can. Now let's come back to questions which are directed to you. During residency, did you see a lot of people with additional degrees other than an MD? As a Caribbean medical student, I have colleagues who have much experience in science, paramedical fields, and I wonder if that gives them a lot of edge over students with just a medical degree during the match process.
Right. Very good questions. So personally, I didn't think I saw a lot, probably, I want to say maybe 10-20%. Some have PhDs, which is always helpful, especially if you're applying to research. Although you have to weigh the pros and cons of being, that long in terms of your gap years between graduation and application year. Some has MPH, a little bit less than PhD, some MS. I actually personally have a master's degree in applied psychology because just to share my background a bit, I don't think I've mentioned this. I moved here to the US, not for the USMLE initially, actually. So I moved here for grad school. I went to USC for my master's in psychology, and I dabbled a bit in business consulting. And then one day I decided, hey, I want to go back to medicine and I want to be a psychiatrist here. So, especially in my case, and I think in many others, it may or may not be viewed as quote unquote red flag just because that gap years. It just depends. But regardless, I think it's best to own it. So in my case, it's already there. I have to own it. I have to position it strategically in a way that uh, sells myself, right, as a psychiatry residency applicant. So it's not a checkbox, I would say, that you have to complete in order to gain an edge. It's probably, if you're a fresh graduate, it's probably better to just jump right into the USMLE and the applications. But if you already have it, then please try to position it in a way that sells yourself and sell your application as a whole.
And I think you answered the next question already, but let me see if you have anything else to add. The whole USMLE process is time consuming. What is the best efficient way to fill the gaps while going through all this? So I think we already covered it, but if you have other pointers, on this.
Yes, good question. So absolutely, it is time consuming. I think quote unquote multitasking works because of several reasons. Just to add on the points that we already talked about. So first, it's whether it's USMLE or beyond residency, right? Just jobs in general. It's probably best to not have gaps in your resume. So because of that reason, I would recommend, if you can, try to keep a um, longer position. For instance, in my case, I work simultaneously at those 3 jobs for a longer time, a year at least, versus doing a short stint one after the other. So versus, let's say, work at place A for 1 month and then a gap, work at place B for 1 month and then place C for another month and so forth. Why? Because especially in research and also in building connections for the letters, it's very hard research-wise to get anything concrete result-wise in 1 month versus 1 year, right? You're more likely to get publications, a lot of them, presentations and what have you if you stay there longer. In terms of connection, it's very hard perhaps for the other person to write a personalized, unique, non-generic strong letters if they only know you for 1 month, which is literally 20 days, 20 working days, if
Right.
any. Versus if it's 1 year, then you could build that connections, not only for the letters part, but also for networking and beyond, because their words, as you guys know, goes a long way, especially in psychiatry. The academic circles is very small. So it's very likely that your mentors know other other leaders from the other programs, and that's very high yield in my opinion.
So then there are questions that, I'm an old graduate. I've done my residency in India already. And how can I do a competitive branch like OBGYN? So what are your recommendations for old graduates with home country residency?
And I assume the home country residency would be the same in OB as
I
well.
guess it would be the same OBGYN. Yeah.
Yes, great question. So in that case, I would go back to own your experience, right? Because no one else has it. And in terms of having being an old graduate, because you already have home country residency, you could strategically position it as an advantage, right? Because let's say, compared to freshly graduated medical students, obviously you have a lot of more OB experiences, which you can expand on, not only in terms of technical knowledge, technical skills for OB procedures and whatnot, but also, just how to deal with difficult OB patients, perhaps, how to handle subtle situations in the day-to-day of an OB and things along those lines. So as I think if you position it and sell yourself that way with concrete evidence, using numbers if possible of your accomplishments that are relevant, then it could be definitely an advantage.
Next question. This is your elevator pitch. What were the top 5 things that set you apart from other IMGs during the match process?
Oh my, that's a burning questions right there. Top 5. Okay, so Let me think. I would say first, I can showcase myself to that I'm a go-getter and able to quote unquote multitask efficiently with results uh, because of my 14 publications, 7 of which are first authored, 5 research experience, 3 clinical experience, and 4 strong letters of recommendations from the thought leaders in the field, um, which set me apart perhaps from other applicants. Second would be my the fact that I was able to complete the steps while doing all those in such a short amount of times with good results. The third thing would be my strong interest in psychiatry, and that's because all my experience, research, personal statement, and everything else in my application and answers during interview as a whole uh, tied in nicely to psychiatry. So I think that sincerity in terms of interest stood out. Um, 2 more, huh?
3 is enough, I guess.
That would be my top 3 elevator pitch. Just to, to keep it short in terms of the attention span of my interviewers or the other audience.
And so I guess we'll publish your contact information, but someone had a question. I live in California. I want to get in touch with you. So I guess we can send them your information.
Absolutely.
As a chief resident, what are the most common cases you encountered during your practice over the years? And where are you headed in the next 5 years career-wise?
Oh, very loaded questions. I love it. So common cases, common psychiatric cases in this case, it would be your, kind of like your bread and butter psychiatry. That would be depression, anxiety. During our child rotations, ADHD is very common. During inpatient hospitalizations, a lot of schizophrenia and manic patients. So I would say it depends on the setting, right? Hospital versus clinic versus the VA versus child clinic. But mostly for psychiatry as a whole, depression and anxiety is your bread and butter.
Okay.
And then
second question, career-wise, where are you headed?
Career-wise, great question. So I, as I mentioned, I'm right now I'm doing private practice psychiatry. I would love to help high performers to optimize their lifestyle in addition to doing the regular psychiatric care. So in 5 years, I'm hoping to continue to be in that space and just establish the field of lifestyle psychiatry even further, as well as the perinatal psychiatry and sports psychiatry too.
I'm planning to apply for California programs. What steps can I take to get some clinical and research experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. So just to take my case as an example, I lived in LA. So my first step that I did was to open my beloved Excel spreadsheet, research all the university programs with psych residency within SoCal, Southern California, and then listed their leaderships, chairs, program directors, fellowship directors, and whatnot, their research in my case, and then their email address. So my first step that I would recommend is to reach out and try to connect with them, especially since you're in California, and then go from there, see if any research opportunities, clinical opportunities, or just informational interview opportunities might come up that way.
Okay. And I think this may also answer the next question. How to find research? Can we do it in US along with observership? So I think we've already covered that. There are some other questions that I can handle. List of IMG friendly observership programs. So, we have it in our website. So I'll take care of that. Let's see what else we got. Someone who is applying in the next cycle, so not September of 2022, but September 2023. I want to apply for the next cycle. I'll take my step 1 in November 2022. Then I'll complete my step 2 OET. Now, of course, CS is gone, so there is OET. And then there is, step 3 or USC 3 months. Step 3, what is the ideal timeline until the next cycle of application? So I think you already answered it, but in case you have more perspective on how someone who's applying next September should plan.
That's a great question. So my number one tip, and this is also advised to me by all of my mentors actually, is to get everything on time, if you can, of course. So I believe the deadline is end of September.
Generally, yeah.
This year too. So by everything, that includes, obviously your USMLE scores that you need, or test scores that you need to get certified, your CV as a whole, which would include the research, clinical experience, your at least 3 letters is also important, personal statement, of course. In terms of step 3, I think it depends on your visa requirement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Pawan. If you don't need visa, I personally took it during residency, so I don't think it's a do or die for those who don't need visa. But if you need visa, it probably could, if it's a pass, of course, it probably could boost up your application. But having said that, in case you're missing something, meaning, for example, you have a publications that's still in the works, it haven't been published yet, you could always reach out after you submit the applications, strategically reach out to programs to say, hey, I have an update, this just got published. And that could be a good way to connect with them, or reach out personally to more programs too, and get more interviews.
Next question, very personal one. My father passed away right during my internship, and I had gone through depression, and my journey to USMLE was postponed due to depression. How can I explain that during the match process, maybe during the interviews and in my CV and PS?
First of all, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must be very tough for you, I can only imagine. In terms of addressing that, I think there's no wrong way to address it. It happens, life happens, right, to all of us, including the interviewers, the ones who read the personal statement, who screen out applicants. So I don't think it would be held against you in this case, especially.
Yep. I'm interested in IM. Should I only be doing research in IM, or any other specialty can be chosen for research, which can involve IM? For example, obesity in pregnancy, is that considered IM topic?
Great question. So for IM, uniquely, I think it encompasses a lot of things. So I personally would think obesity and what was the other one?
Obesity in pregnancy.
And pregnancy. So obesity could definitely be under IM. Pregnancy, well, traditionally it's under OB in terms of care, but you could also phrase it in terms of how often an IM medicine patients come to the office who might also be pregnant, right? Because almost half of the population is women, and a lot of them are within those reproductive age. So it's very likely that pregnant patients come to your IM care. So in terms of the concept, I think that could definitely fall under IM, but most importantly, is how you tied it all up together to sell you as an IM applicant. So perhaps not to emphasize the OB part of it, but emphasize why those experiences are relevant to IM, and in a objective way.
Okay, and I guess the last question before we wrap up: did you have any mentors while starting your USMLE journey? How do you go about finding mentors in general?
Great questions. So answer is yes, absolutely, 100%. The way I went about it is through my Excel spreadsheet that I mentioned. So the mentors that I reach out, this is cold email, guys, by the way. I don't know them. I have zero connections in the medical world back then. So when I reach out and then they agree to bring me on their research projects, and since I worked for them for quite a while, I just built that relationship. And I was able, to get a lot of mentorships, and still to this day, had a lot of great advice and insights from them too.
Okay. Maybe another question is coming up. So
Yeah.
if you have been diagnosed, let's say someone had some medical condition and that it delayed the journey, etc. Should you mention these things in your personal statement? I think you answered this already, but during interview, personal statement, should these things be addressed? Your medical conditions that may have resulted in delay of your exams, journey, maybe scores?
Right. That's a good question. So perhaps I don't know if it differs specialty to specialty. I would like to think in psych, we're more open/understanding in general, versus, for example, if the medical condition might perceive to be, to be an obstacle in any way in terms of interfering with work later on in that specialty. So I think it's a case by case analysis for disclosing that. Some factors to consider is the one that I mentioned, if it's going to be interfering with your potential work as a resident, just because perhaps program don't want to take in a residence and then have the residents not being able to continue, and then they have to go into all the hassles of finding a new incoming person, in a time crunch where all the rest of the residents have to pick up the slack, so to speak. The second factors to consider, though, also is if that's so obvious in terms of some red flags, it's better if you address it first preemptively before the other person asks, right? Because that way it builds trust and kind of credibility. So it's just a case by case analysis, I would say, in that case.
Okay. Well, the questions keep flowing in, so I don't know where to stop, but maybe this is the last one. Is LinkedIn, did you use LinkedIn for finding mentorship? What about any of these social media, social/professional, LinkedIn, Twitter? What is your recommendation? Instagram?
Great question. So LinkedIn, yes, definitely, 100%. I did use LinkedIn in addition to cold email. I think LinkedIn is probably way easier, right? Because then you just have to add and then create a little message, customized message, please, to the mentors. I personally did not use other social medias just because I'm not. Just because I think LinkedIn and emails would serve my purpose better. In that case, also my email, my strategic email would be longer to send, for example, in Instagram and whatnot. So LinkedIn and email are my go-tos.
Well, I think we covered every question. This was very interactive. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sarah. This was very, very informative. And we are glad you were able to spend some time with our audience. And we'll follow up with any other tips that you may have. We'll post them. We'll send them by email. But thank you, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. And may I also say, Pawan, thank you so much for Sarthi. Guys, this is a one-stop resources for all things application. If you want to talk about efficiency, you have it all right here. I wish I knew about it back then when I was applying. So please take advantage of it.
Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too. Have a great
Thanks.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.